Hi, I'm David Manti, and welcome to the Today in Manufacturing podcast, a new show with the editors from Industrial Media where we talk about the top news this week in manufacturing. With me today is Jeff Ranke and Anna Wells. We've been covering the industry for about 15 years, so we're just starting to get it. How are you guys doing today?
Good, David. How about yourself?
Feeling good about it. A lot of coffee already, getting ready.
Hey, David, that sounds like a normal day for you.
It definitely is. I'm going to shake later. All right. Well, let's just jump right into it, all right? So basically, the way that this works is we took the top 5 stories from our 7 different websites that cover the manufacturing industry. And the 5th most popular article this week was the aerospace plant closing in Washington and 130 jobs lost. So basically, the story is 4 years ago, Triumph Composite Systems had 600 workers in Spokane, Washington. The company builds floor panels and ducting for Boeing jets. And from April 1 to September 30th, 2020, the company's parent, Triumph Group, actually lost $309.3 million. By summer 2022, the remaining 130 employees at the business will be out of work. Anna, what's your take on this story?
Well, first of all, can we talk about Spokane? Because I think it's pronounced Spokane. No, seriously, it was such a dramatic collapse for Triumph. As you mentioned, they had 600 workers in Washington as recently as 2017, and now they're going to lay off their last 130 employees by the end of next year, which is just really a sad testament to the way some of these suppliers are just absolutely tethered to companies like Boeing, who has had just a disastrous 2 years. In fact, Boeing's MAX debacle really set the table for the canceled orders and layoffs, but the dramatic pause in air travel really drove some nails in for Boeing, and the company cut thousands of its own jobs in calendar year 2020. And now executives are warning that there will likely be more. And on top of that, Boeing posted a $12 billion loss recently, which was a record for that company that's been around in Seattle, no less, for like 100 years, since the early 1900s. Crazy.
Yes, and I believe it is pronounced Seattle.
Yeah, you're good. You're good.
Yeah, no, I wanted to note that in 2020, Boeing delivered just 157 aircraft, which is down from 380 jets in 2019 and 806 in 2018. Although Boeing's production hasn't been that low since 1973. Jeff, what do you think of that?
I mean, it's incredible, and it's so unfortunate when you look at a lot of these firms. I think the size of Triumph right now are really going to tell a story of the whole economic recovery, because they're the ones that obviously the bigger players like Boeing and others in the aerospace sector, and this will bleed into automotive as well. In order for these larger companies to bounce back, they need these smaller, mid-sized suppliers to also be healthy. So Boeing needs Triumph. Boeing is somewhat insulated in the fact they've got defense work. They've got other things going. They're working with NASA. But even once they start, getting back up to speed, and according to their website, they have almost 4,000 planes on back order. So the pipeline is full for them once things get back to normal, so to speak. But is all of their supply chain going to be there? Mm-hmm. And what's going to happen throughout U.S. manufacturing when we do try to ramp back up? Is all the supporting mechanisms going to be there? Because we know the big guys will survive. It's how these smaller, mid-sized firms that are so important and so critical to something so important as air travel, where are they going to be, and how's that going to impact things on a bigger picture? I think that's one of the things that sort of remains to be seen and maybe gets a little more attention. Mm-hmm. Boeing laying off, I think some of the reports are looking at almost 20,000 people that they're going to end up laying off throughout since last year. We know that they're insulated. But what are they doing to help some of these smaller places, and hopefully they can survive?
Yeah, I think 30,000 was one of the upwards guesses, which is just crazy to think about. Mm-hmm. But, I think another interesting angle to this story that, everyone's talking about the circumstances of COVID and the airline industry and how awful that's been, and obviously Boeing's specific struggles as well. But there are still some critics out there who are actually questioning the motives behind Triumph's decision to close. And one of them was John Holden, who is the district president of the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers. Mm-hmm. And he actually released a statement saying that, quote, while COVID is one of the circumstances that may have led to this decision, Triumph built factories in Mexico where they've sent a large portion of the Spokane plant's work over the last 7 or 8 years.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So he's kind of saying look, this situation is clearly to blame, but don't forget about offshoring some of this work in the past few years, which I thought was interesting.
Well, I think that we've seen that a lot in this industry where sort of COVID-19 winds up becoming a good scapegoat or a popular scapegoat for people. And Jeff, I really like your point about some of the small companies out there. We saw the story with the Ford F-150 today about chip production holding up. Was it chip production from a supplier that's holding up the F-150?
Right. Yeah. And, they're not the only ones, right? I mean, automotive production, we're talking more aerospace here, but there are parallels between the two sectors. Obviously, they need those suppliers to be in place and be running at full strength once they start ramping up.
Yeah. Just another note, that big competitor Airbus last year had 566 deliveries. Again, that's to Boeing's just 157, 268 orders, and a backlog of 7,100, almost 7,200 airplanes. So not looking as bad for Airbus. All right, moving on to the next topic. The fourth most popular story was a very tragic accident. The system in a deadly leak was recently installed. Basically, this is a follow-up story from the January 28th incident when a liquid nitrogen leak at the Foundation Food Group in Northeast Georgia poultry plant killed 6 people and sent 11 others to the hospital. Poultry plants rely on refrigeration systems that can include liquid nitrogen. Now, major portions of the plant's liquid nitrogen's interior and exterior system were installed and commissioned in the past 4 to 6 weeks. So, relatively new system. And the plant received 2 to 3 18-wheel truckloads per day of liquid nitrogen. What I found interesting was that the color on that, the quote was, it was a quantity described as, quote, a lot.
Yeah, well.
And I'd like to send it to you first. Tell me a little bit about what you think of the story.
Yeah, I mean, that is a lot. That's like an insane amount of liquid nitrogen, I think probably being used for flash freezing. They probably produce a lot of chickens at this plant, but, looking back, it appears they believe one of those nitrogen lines may have ruptured. But I think one part of this story that's been sort of quietly buried is that of the facility's maintenance manager, who really was a hero in all of this. The manager reportedly actually physically closed the isolation valves on the tanks that were supplying the nitrogen when he kind of figured out what was going on, in action that was like lauded by the Chemical Safety and Hazard Investigation Board's chairperson, Catherine Lemos, as stemming the potential damages and casualties relating to this event, which were already catastrophic. So, kudos to that person. I don't know his or her name, but for kind of stepping in there and making sure that it wasn't worse than it already was.
Yeah, it was a truly heroic effort. And I definitely wish that that was a bigger part of the story. Jeff, what were your thoughts on the incident?
Well, piggybacking off of what Anna was saying, obviously this guy prevented this from being even worse. Okay. And the outcome could have been much, much worse. But to me, and we've all been in these facilities, and when you look at the food processing sector specifically, the margins on those products are pennies. So they do need to put a lot of product through as quickly as possible. They can't have downtime. They need to be constantly in motion. And what that can lead to, and I don't want to jump the gun because we don't have all of the details from OSHA and some of the other folks that are obviously going to be involved here in investigating what happened, but it was a manual process that this maintenance manager had to undertake. All 3 of us have written numerous articles about smart manufacturing, industrial, the Internet of Things, Industry 4.0, all of that talk about the connected industry, and sort of taking the manual processes or removing as many as possible and implementing more sensors and more meters and other things that can be used to identify when these types of problems occur, when there is a leak with something, these types of chemicals. So I think that's also a bigger story here. A lot of these IoT and sensor-based technologies don't have to be grand schemes and huge networks and tremendous levels of investment. They can be smaller things that still lead into a bigger picture of plant safety. And I think that's important. That's the important takeaway here is it shouldn't have been a manual process by one individual. This should have been something that a safety team understood. Granted, the scope of that can vary depending on the size of the facility. But again, there are some low-level investments that can be made at the plant level that can go a long way towards preventing these types of tragedies.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of cool technologies that have been emerging as a result, particularly of the pandemic, in terms of making employees more efficient, separating employees, giving them a little bit more technology to make their job a little bit easier and be able to accomplish it with fewer people in the room. But, you know, kind of to your point, when you say that they're only making pennies on these products, like even if these are sort of like low level investments, do you think they're going to be willing and able to make them? Or is their hand going to be forced?
You know, and I think that's always kind of the interesting conversation with OSHA, right? OSHA carries a stick. You know, there's no real carrot there when it comes to levying a lot of these fines. And I'm not bashing that organization, that agency for doing that. When a facility is in violation, they do need to get their hands slapped. But I think there can also be part of that goes beyond that's just the educational things that they do, but also saying, hey, here's what you should be doing. Here are some things that are definitely going to prevent this from happening, and incentivizing them or providing different assistance to help get those things in place. You know, a lot of the folks, I think you were going to talk a little bit on this, when you look at the workforce, maybe not as highly trained, maybe not as highly paid as other places, but if you're going to take that route then with your workforce, potentially there should be room for investments for keeping them safe.
Yeah, I mean, that point on the workforce that I wanted to mention is that, you know, we see this a lot in the meat packing and food plants, a lot of immigrant labor. And what I found interesting was a story about how the Mexican government is actually paying really close attention to working conditions for Mexican laborers at these meat processing plants in the United States, because 5 of the workers who died in this particular industrial accident were Mexicans. And I just think... I mean, almost to the point of the maintenance manager, sometimes we kind of get lost in the stats of an accident and not really the people that were lost in it.
Yeah.
All right, moving on to the next story. So it was a fiery blast, and everyone likes a fiery blast in a video, so it was quite popular. SpaceX's Starship test ended in an explosion. On February 2nd, SpaceX conducted its second full flight test of the bullet-shaped Starship, which is in just a few years could be used to take people to Mars, which... You know, if this pandemic continues and I'm locked at home, I'm going. You know what? I'm going to send postcards from Mars. Honey, everything's great here. I learned how to garden. The rocket reached an altitude of 6.5 miles, almost 6.5 miles, which is 10 kilometers. But it didn't straighten itself back up in time for landing, and it slammed into the ground and blew up. 2 months after the previous test, ended in an explosion as well. Jeff, what were your thoughts on this incident that happened at SpaceX?
Well, I think, you know, SpaceX has almost conditioned us to expect these types of things. And whenever they respond to it, it's always kind of like, well, you know, this happens, you know.
Yeah.
We didn't stick the landing. It's almost like, you know, talking to a beginning gymnastics student or something like that. It's never portrayed as a huge setback. Whereas I think if this was still the public sector, if you're still looking, if this was a NASA rocket or something like that, it's a much bigger deal. There's more scrutiny involved. It's taxpayer dollars, and potentially rightfully so. So I think it's just a really interesting dynamic that for SpaceX, this is a cost of doing business. This is part of their product development program. They know these types of things are going to happen. And it's just, I think, just such a really interesting case study overall with SpaceX, how they have taken something that was government controlled, solely a government type of program, and privatized it, and been very successful doing so, and continues, to their credit, really pushing the limits, continuing, not really accepting for what they're doing or staying with what they're doing, accepting what's going on right now, but always wanting to do more. Obviously, a lot of that comes from their CEO. He likes a little bit of publicity. I don't know. He seems to like his name being out there a little bit.
Guy.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to me, and that's the biggest takeaway that I always take away from these things. Yeah, the fireballs and all that kind of stuff, but it's just how they have taken something like this, privatized it, and been so successful with it, and just continue to roll with it.
Right. He shot a Tesla Roadster into space while it was pumping Bowie.
There you go.
That's marketing right there. That's how you do it. Anna, what was your take on the situation?
Yeah, I think we're going to see more fireballs in our future. But to be honest, like to Jeff's point, people are just so fascinated by this technology in the private sector that I just don't think that this is enough, or I don't even think anything is enough to deter public interest in the possibility of consumer space travel. No,
well, I mean, and to their credit, I mean, like you were saying, they have reinvigorated interest in the space program.
Well, exactly. And to be honest, like people just want to go to freaking space, you know, like I mean, it definitely helps to be rich. We saw reports in late January that there were 3 ultra wealthy men that had purchased tickets on a SpaceX flight to the International Space Station for $55 million a piece, which is like completely bonkers. And I mean, do they get better food for that? Like,
I don't think so. I think it's still tang and like the that cotton candy taste and stuff. I don't know.
It's that 1980s like Neapolitan ice cream loaf.
Exactly.
It's like
exactly
that I loved actually when I was a kid.
Oh yeah.
But well, the other story is Jared Isaacman, which this one's pretty cool. He's a billionaire too, of course, but it was recently announced that he had bought out a full SpaceX flight of 4 seats, and he's giving one to a healthcare worker for St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital. And the other, or one of the others, is being used as a prize where anyone who donates to St. Jude's in February will be entered into a drawing for the seat, which is, unlike you, David, something I would opt out of if it were me. My appetite for risk is like, should I get cheese on that? Like, that's about as far as I'm going to go.
Anna would continue to be charitable with that. You know, after donating to St. Jude, she would then also be willing
donate my seat right back.
Yeah. I tell you what, you donate to St. Jude's in the event that you win it. I'll gladly take it.
You can have it.
It's just, you know, it's going to be quite a thrill. I found it interesting that some of the language that they used around the incident, SpaceX commentators saying that, you know, we've just got to work on that landing a little bit. I mean, and you know, as everyone's kind of like fretting over the explosion, just the reminder that this is a test flight. One thing that I want to talk about is that trying to land this rocket, you know, the reusability of these rockets is what is very interesting about SpaceX's business model, is how there was a tremendous amount of waste in these programs previously. And, you know, while they didn't stick this landing, if they start figuring it out going forward, I mean, that is going to, you know, bring the cost down of those ventures significantly. I mean, not to where we're going without a winning entry.
I'm in.
Yeah, right. Just to have $55 million to be like, you know what, hun? I'm sorry I didn't tell you, but bought a ticket to space. Like, whoa. Is it
or 3?
Can we write it off? The other thing I was interested in is how SpaceX and Tesla somehow have an uncanny ability, I mean, obviously from their leader, to always be in the press. I mean, I was trying to run the numbers to see how many times we ran a daily newsletter that at least had one or the other or both at the top above the fold. And I mean, it almost makes me ask, like, is all press good press? Because it seems like no matter what, explosion or not, we're talking about SpaceX and Tesla for that matter a lot.
If you look at Tesla's market valuation, then I would say the answer to that question is yes. All press is good press, because that, I mean, what did they say that like it would take 1,600 years of sales for Tesla to make enough money to achieve its market valuation a couple weeks ago?
Yeah.
That seems off.
Yeah, no, it's just and it's always interesting.
Well, and I think it's good press as long as you can weather the storm. And Musk seems to have a real good raincoat, you know, because it wasn't too long ago we were talking about how Tesla hadn't made money and was losing millions every month. And, you know, a little bit of it is depending on your perspective in terms of how well Tesla is doing. But to Anna's point, stock's through the roof. He's doing okay.
Well, and that's what, you know, I've heard that, you know, all the major automakers are trying to make an electric vehicle play now. Right. But one of the biggest issues that keeps coming up is that people don't want an electric vehicle. They want a Tesla.
Yeah. You know, and what's mechanically, I think they seem to be very sound. You haven't heard any reliability issues, complaints that way. Obviously, some of the technology also poses some interesting headlines for us that we've gotten to talk about in terms of autonomous vehicles and some other things like that technology. But, you know, until they really get a footprint, Tesla, and I know we're kind of deviating off of the SpaceX story here, but until they get a footprint, I think that is going to hinder their growth. Because at the end of the day, you want to take your car to get fixed someplace. Yeah. You know, now the trend is wherever you bought it, that is kind of usually where you take it to get it fixed, or the oil. I mean, you don't have to get the oil changed with an electric car, obviously, but any kind of maintenance that would pop up, it's nice to have a little bit of certainty in terms of where you can go and just that easy drop off the vehicle. Whereas with a Tesla, I mean, for us here, we're talking in Madison, Wisconsin. I think we'd have to go down to Chicago or something like that to have it taken care of.
Well, I think part of the business model is they send a tech to you.
Okay.
So, but I mean, I don't know how that works because, I couldn't spring for the Tesla. I just went with the real sexy RAV.
Yeah.
Let's diverge from the topic even further and do a loose segue into the next topic. The second most popular story this week was MIT backs engineer charged in China crackdown. The story revolves around Gang Chen, a prominent mechanical engineering professor at MIT who was arrested earlier this month for failing to disclose financial and academic ties to China when applying for U.S. government grants. Prosecutors say that he collected $29 million, foreign dollars, and alleged that he was loyal to his native country. But the twist is that MIT and his colleagues see things differently. The university is paying for his legal defense, and MIT faculty members have been speaking out, saying that Chen's actions amounted to routine academic work that did not require such disclosure. Chen, it is important to say, didn't pass any sensitive information to China, and critics say it's unwise to crack down on these cases that do not involve economic espionage. Anna, what's your take on the story?
Yeah, it's really such an unusual case. We know that the China initiative has been successful in targeting some incidents of intellectual property theft, but this one appears to be sort of flimsy, so much so that MIT seems really confident in putting up the cash for their faculty members' defense. I read a recent blog published by the China Collection, and Margaret Lewis, who's a professor of law at Seton Hall, contends that this specific arrest of Professor Chen should actually signal, in her belief, the end of the 2-year run of the China initiative. And she called it a flawed response to the problem of intellectual property theft. She says that it's cases like these that get outside of the traditional spying idea. And then they start to place actually what she calls harmful suspicion on people of Chinese nationality or ethnicity. And it's hard to argue with her that that might be the case here. It's horrifying to consider, but somebody like Professor Chen, he's lived here in America for decades. He has citizenship, and MIT is acknowledging that this situation was, above board. And, Lewis, the lawyer, she's acknowledging that the Biden administration has signaled that it will continue to take a hard line with China. But she hopes that maybe there's room to modify this existing China initiative to make it less open to the influence of, say, like xenophobia or preconception. So it's interesting, this case. I agree.
Yes, nothing like the great American tradition of attacking something with a very blunt object. Jeff, what's your take on the
there's just such a pent-up level of frustration from U.S. manufacturers when it comes to losing their intellectual property and things that they've worked a long time on developing to China, Taiwan, other developers and throughout Asia. So I think that's one of the problems that's overcoming here. I think it's not just the xenophobic outliers, but also just that deep-seated frustration of losing something you've worked so hard on for so long that you get knocked off and sold at a lower price. In another life, I worked in the automotive tool and equipment sector, and these guys, the folks that we worked with, these suppliers would be at a trade show having all their new stuff out, and they would have individuals come up and taking pictures of them just so they could take it back to the factory in China and produce a cheaper version of it. Very difficult situation, especially when you're looking at a lot of smaller and mid-level size manufacturers who are counting on that tool to sort of drive sales for 6 months to a year. So there is that buildup that's coming behind a lot of this China initiative. Obviously, there have been some other political factors that have pushed it to the forefront and given it a lot more momentum. So maybe it is time to scale back a little bit. I think the biggest thing that I saw, and this was a really, really intriguing story, really interesting. First of all, with MIT coming out and backing their professor, I thought that was very ballsy. I thought that showed a lot of guts on their part, right or wrong, for them to back him up. But also there just needs to be a clear line drawn between funding and the real issue, which is the IP, the intellectual property, the actual thing that's being developed here, and not sacrificing the research side of it, allowing that to still take place without impacting the finished product and hurting potentially U.S. manufacturers or manufacturers anywhere, even with an original idea that don't want it knocked off at a lower cost.
Well, and I think it's also important to note that the university funding went to MIT, not Chen. You know, he's not just hanging out with $29 million in the bank account. And it was
he's trying to get one of those SpaceX seeds.
That's right. He's like, I'm halfway there. I'm halfway to space. And it's also part of a well-known research collaboration. But I mean, it's just crazy to me that on the accusations alone, I mean, he's facing 30 years in prison.
Yeah, I don't know the law. I'm not going to try to. That seems like a lot. I mean, man, except at the end of the day, again, to me, and maybe you guys see it a little different, but it's about protecting that product. It's about protecting that potential manufacturer of that product. 30 years in jail when there isn't even like a real product potentially at stake here yet. I don't know. That definitely deserves more question and more investigation there.
Agreed. So finally, the top story of this week fired a lot of people up, and kudos to Anna to writing this one. Dodge says that supercharged V8's days are numbered, and man, the masses went crazy. In a recent interview, Dodge CEO Tim Kuniskis said, quote, "The days of an iron block supercharged 6.2 liter V8 are numbered." And again, the world went crazy. But Dodge believes that these engines can be replaced by electrics and usher in a new golden age of muscle cars. Kuniskis says it's a lot like the death of the original muscle cars in the early 70s when oil prices and safety requirements started to make them unworkable. Jeff, I'm going to go to you first. Is this similar to what they saw in the 70s?
I mean, yes and no. Okay. I think a lot of this is really steeped in, when you say the world went crazy, let's be honest, it was U.S. auto buyers. I mean, we like our muscle cars, we like attitude, we like noise, all of that good stuff. But at the end of the day, automakers are going to do what the mass consumer wants, okay? Now, there's always going to be room for customization. There's always going to be those prototypes, those special cars. But when you can take that attitude, if you will, or that muscle and put it into something like an electric, which sort of satisfies multiple masters. I mean, look at the electric Mustang. I mean, sales are very strong. Demand was strong. They sold out before they could get everything out of production. So I think a lot of that is driven by changing consumer demand. And I think really what he's doing, I think what Kuniskis is really doing there at Dodge is leaving all his doors open. He's saying, look, we do need to respond to consumer demands and develop an EV version of these muscle cars. But we also know that there's still going to be that collection of guys who's always going to be interested. People, I should say, not just guys. But.
Yeah. No. Yeah. Understood. Anna, what do you think? Is Kuniskis blaming regulation?
Yeah, I think that's the important part of this that's kind of getting glossed over. Market demand is one thing. I mean, Dodge has actually sold like 50,000 some Hellcats over the past 5 years. So I agree that the market is there for it. But what Kuniskis actually said, and this was a recent interview that he gave to CNBC, is he's basically blaming the regulatory environment for the V8s going away. And like the rest of us, I think he sees this, potentially tightening under President Biden. And so he's seeing the writing on the wall, sort of likening today's climate to 1972 when things began to kind of fall apart for the earlier muscle cars. And he said that he worries, I thought this was an interesting quote from him. He said he worries we are, quote, too drunk on the horsepower to see it. So, maybe that the market is just refusing to acknowledge this. And it'll be an interesting tipping point, in my opinion, to see, you could ask the question, will the gearheads and the muscle car enthusiasts adapt in time with the market and embrace the EV version of what the new muscle car of the future will be? But they might have to, like they might not have a choice. And one of those things is going to come first. Either these will get regulated out of existence, or people will adapt, and we'll just see, who wins that race. But I don't think that there's an alternative outcome. And I think that's what Kuniskis is really acknowledging here.
Jeff, is that part of the problem that, do you think it's that gearheads think they're going to be left behind, so to speak? Just because with some of these EVs, while they can be powerful, there's not a lot of room to play in them,
Yeah, but I mean, look, there's tuner shops out there messing with EVs right now. So I don't think it's that. And I would agree with Anna. Trying to blame this on a regulatory thing is kind of ridiculous. When you look at the size of motors and horsepower being put into trucks and they're flying off the shelves and are flying out of the lots, and there's no issues meeting CAF standards and other things like that with those types of vehicles. So the technology's there. They can do that. I think what he is really doing is sort of leaving his options open and trying to appease a lot of different people. As far as the other question in terms of are they getting left behind? I mean, kind of, but to Anna's point, market trends are going to dictate. At the end of the day, Dodge wants to sell vehicles, okay? Yeah, if they can make the world a little cleaner place, that's great, but they want to sell cars and trucks. So they're going to do what the market's asking for. And right now, everything we've seen in the last 18 months, it's an SUV or it's an electric. I mean, look at we've covered stories where Ford and General Motors just eliminated models. Impala, Malibu. I mean, to name a couple, pretty good selling cars that kind of went the way of the dodo just because they were not hitting what customers were looking for right now.
Well, and if you look at what's happened in California and the way automakers have had to respond to that, it's easier for them to make dramatic changes to their design and their development and their entire product line in order to satisfy California's standards. So if California regulates muscle cars out of existence in California, they're not going to make a special version for everybody else. I mean, that's too much cost for them. So it will be interesting to see who strikes first and how long it takes. But I could see this happening where we do see some major changes coming to these types of cars.
The one thing I just want to add is that I feel like no matter what, American muscle will find a way. Like it happened in the 70s, everyone thought it was going to be the end of it with oil prices and safety requirements, and American muscle came back.
Well, and again, just because if they stop making the Hellcat, they're still going to make the motor. They're still going to make the chassis, or somebody will. Okay. They'll still be out there.
Well, and even if it's an EV, I think there's just something that's going to be bigger, badder, and better and just look cool, but it'll be available, but it's just not going to be the first thing because, like you said, it's not what market demands.
Yeah, it's not going to be at the mass-produced level, which will drive up the price point, which see how people respond.
Right on. Okay, I wanted to move on to our next segment. And basically, we call it the big news segment because we had top news, and those are the top 5 stories of the week. And then this is big news, where a lot of times we write stories and we cover articles that, are really important for our readership and for the people that's in the manufacturing sector, but don't always get the clicks. People aren't always checking it out. And Jeff, I wanted to go to you first. What do you think is the sort of big news that a lot of people might have missed this week?
I don't think anybody missed it, but I think it's definitely worth talking more about with Jeff Bezos stepping down from his post at Amazon and maybe taking on a little bit more of a role in the background, so to speak. I thought it was interesting for a couple reasons. I mean, first of all, you always look at the replacement. All reports say Andy Jassy looks to be the good guy to step in. I think it's always interesting when you look at these entrepreneurs, and I wouldn't be surprised if you saw Elon Musk do something similar, where entrepreneurs love to build stuff. They love to build it. Managing it, just not as exciting, not as much fun. And I think what's going to be interesting to me, we're talking a lot about SpaceX here and the privatization of space exploration, satellite launching, all that type of thing. Well, Jeff Bezos has this little thing called Blue Origin. So he's put a couple dollars into it. They've got some things going on there, but they're definitely trailing SpaceX right now. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see how much time and energy now he's able to shift to that and what Blue Origin is capable of doing as a result. They're focused maybe a little bit more on the tourism element of it and getting people out to space and stuff like that. So it might take a little bit longer that way. But I know they're also very, very interested, obviously, in competing with SpaceX for some of those NASA contracts and other things on a defense level. So I think, to me, that's what's most intriguing here. If Jeff Bezos, who has built Amazon into this, I don't know, whatever you want to call it,
world dominating global phenomena.
I mean, it's changed the way we live our lives. I mean, the way we buy things and get stuff to take care of our families. So, I mean, if he's able to have a similar type of impact, I mean, with Blue Origins, that's what's going to be most interesting to me to see. How how his impact goes there, because I don't think he's looking for a beach to buy and chill out on right now. So.
Well, and if you look at some of the design work that's going on at Blue Origin, like if you think some of the SpaceX stuff is cool, like maybe because they are more focused on space tourism, like Blue Origin's capsule is just cool. Like, and you're right. Like, I mean, it's been kind of almost a passion project for him. It's interesting to see what might come of that if he focuses his attention on it.
Well, and it's kind of interesting too. I mean, Elon Musk, one of the things that's helped him a little bit is they build their own batteries. He's almost formed, in a lot of respects, his own supply chain for the big stuff. I mean, they do a lot of their own components even in-house. Jeff Bezos has some pretty good supply chain connections. I'm going to guess. I don't know. He might know a guy or two.
Yeah.
So even the production and the development there could be streamlined in a lot of ways. So be interesting.
Yeah. Anna, anything to add about now the second richest man in the world stepping down from his company?
I think he just keeps popping back and forth with Elon. They just keep switching places based on the stock market. No, it was a pretty exciting announcement. We know Jeff Bezos isn't going anywhere in the sense that, like you guys said, he's an active entrepreneur and he has his hands in a lot of things. So it'll be interesting to see what he's up to next.
Mm-hmm. And I think, not necessarily at this scale, but we see this a lot with startups. There are people that like to start a business and, like you said, not run a business. And so while we don't see it at the scale, we see it quite often.
Yeah. Where
people like to transition into a new role. For me, the big news this week was Harley offering equity to factory workers. And I just thought this was cool because, I mean, we've mentioned it multiple times, but I mean, I feel like factory workers, people on the plant floor, a lot of these are underappreciated workers that, have been essential ever since the beginning of the pandemic. And we really don't talk about it a lot. So Harley-Davidson revealed a 5-year strategy that includes awarding equity grants to 4,500 workers, including all hourly and factory workers. Which I've said factory like 7 times now in one sentence. That's just good radio. Harley hopes it will help improve growth and profitability. Anna, what did you think of this story?
Yeah, I thought that it was interesting. The idea actually came from the leader of a private equity group called KKR. And they own a ton of companies. I believe Lyft. They own Ingersoll Rand. And it came through as sort of a best practices type method that's been shared between one executive and another. So the head of Harley liked the idea and is applying it to Harley's workforce. But as you said, David, and they alluded to this in the press about this story, but industrial workers, they really have the lowest salaries, but can arguably make the biggest difference in a company, especially when it comes to growth, productivity, profitability, things like that. So I would say kudos to both companies, really, and I hope to see more of it.
Jeff?
Yeah, it reminded me back when we were actually going into factories and talking to people, we had our Made in America video series.
Yeah.
And one of the places that I got to go, it was amazing. We went and saw Hannibal Industries out in LA. Mm-hmm. For those who aren't familiar, they make steel pallet racks and steel tubing products. And one of the things that they did in growing the company was offering an employee stock option program, which allowed companies to buy in. A little bit different scale than Harley, but the impact, I think, is what they had at Hannibal is what Harley is looking for. These folks really bought in. As you alluded to, their impact on the finished product is tremendous. When you get somebody who's willing to come in, maybe when they're not feeling great, or stay a couple minutes extra to get something done, or just putting in the extra effort because, in effect, their name is on those products as well. Mm-hmm. The outcome in terms of quality, performance, all those things, it can be huge. So I mean, it's awesome to see Harley doing that, and hopefully they can sort of set an example for some of their peers in this respect and offering a little bit more equity, because I know some of the small and mid-sized manufacturers that we've all talked to have implemented these types of programs and seen tremendous results.
Well, and you know the difference when you walk into that facility. Yeah. You know when there is a facility with employee buy-in that respect it and want to be an active part of it. You see a lot less turnover. You see a lot more, like you said, just overall passion over what they're doing. It's just so much different than when you walk into those facilities and they know they're just a warm body.
Yeah. Safer and cleaner usually too.
Yeah.
I mean, it's they care about where they're working. So.
No, you talk about the Made in America series, but the same thing at Lyco Engineering in Wisconsin, where it was just like immaculately clean. And it was like, I mean, they're an outlier where like employees are coming in earlier, staying later because they just enjoy the work. And I mean, it's a smaller business, family run, but it's just, they know that if they care about the company as much as the owners, it's just a much better relationship in my opinion.
Yeah.
Also because I've worked from the ones on the other side. It's just like, I don't even think they know I'm here, All right. Well, I just wanted to go around and see if anyone had any final thoughts. It's nothing that I put on the rundown, so it's completely unexpected. But Anna, any final thoughts for our, pilot episode here, whether it be the first or the last?
Yeah, it's fun doing a podcast. I would say fewer jokes. No, I'm just kidding.
Better city pronunciation, David.
Yeah.
No geography maybe for next time.
Take an intro social studies course and
No. Pass.
No, it's fun being here with you guys and kind of rapping on the industry. Like we talk about this stuff all day at the office. And now that we're remote, we don't get to chat as much about some of the other, I guess, nuances that are behind some of these big stories. So I'm enjoying that. And I would say to our audience, anybody who is listening, if you see an interesting story out there and you want to know more about it, let us know and we'll try to dig something up.
Mm-hmm. And I will just add that I will not do any ongoing education, but maybe a TED Talk. Maybe I'll sit down for a 5-minute TED Talk.
Dave Talk.
We'll call it no. Dave, there's plenty of. Right. Jeff.
No, this is great. Like Anna said, we don't get a chance to do this as much, so it's kind of cool to be able to do that and interact and talk with you guys. I think looking forward, I think we're just at a really interesting time in our industry too. Just because with things coming out with the Biden administration and a lot of the promises that were made by any incoming president, quite honestly, but definitely some of those things that he's talked about are going to have an impact on manufacturing. Some already have. Some of the environmental things, some of the executive orders that he's issued. So it'll be interesting to see how those things continue to develop too, and maybe we'll have somebody else to talk about in addition to Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos. So.
All right. Well, thank you, Jeff and Anna. And to all the listeners out there, if you could do us a favor and subscribe, give us a like, do any sort of call to action. So that way, maybe we do number 2 next week.
Oh my God.
Well, it's you got to do the stereotypical call to action at the end of the podcast. Otherwise, I just feel like it's for naught.
For naught.
It's not
Wow.
for naught, David.
Wow.
I've had coffee.
Way
Too much.
Way to bring it back.
Yeah.
Turn off your mic.
Thank you all for taking the time. Anna, we're going to lock you in the room back there and shut off the lights. And this has been the first episode of Today in Manufacturing podcast. Thank you all for joining us.